No one covers Manchester United quite like the Manchester Evening News, and through our MUFC Pro app, you can support our journalism and become part of our United community, getting the best experience ad-free, pop-up-free and distraction-free as well, giving you the best news and interviews, great features and much more. Now is the perfect time to subscribe, as we've just launched a special New Year offer which includes MEN Premium for just £12 for 12 months. Download the app and get started today.
Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. We're recording this episode on a Tuesday morning. I'm your host, of course. I'm joined today by Samuel Luckhurst, who was at the DW Stadium on Monday night as Manchester United won 2-0 in the third round of the FA Cup. Samuel, how are you?
Well, thank you. I've warmed up after the Baltic conditions in Wigan last night, but yeah, ready to go, round to go for another podcast.
It looked absolutely freezing, and you said there was no milk in the press box. So did you have anything to warm yourself up with?
Well, they had iced water in the press room, which seemed to be taking it to extremes. But no, we were more than well capable. Wigan's pretty much the capital of pies in this country, and the pies were exceptional. So yeah, it's certainly one of the perks of being in the press box.
You can't complain.
No, you can't.
I saw Henry Winter tweet a picture of a pie and I thought that does look good.
It was.
So fair enough. Anyways, look, it was a routine win in the end. Wigan are struggling in League One. United are struggling in the Premier League, but they should still have more than enough to defeat Wigan, and they did in the end. Created plenty of chances, of course. We'll get on to the kind of wastefulness in a bit, but it was a routine and comfortable victory. Yeah,
they played I'm a believer just before kickoff, but a Wigan win always seemed unbelievable. They had that one shot with the chance in the second minute. I think it might have been quite a good save by Onana. And I think for the tie to have been interesting or watchable, that had to go in. Wigan had to take a shock lead. And when United eventually scored, that goal had been coming for a while, very nonchalantly taken by Dalot. As Ten Hag said afterwards, the pity for them about the game, the performance, was that they just didn't score enough goals. But that's been a recurring theme this season, and we probably have said this. Yeah, we're on repeat in that sense. Whether United win, whether United lose. Last night was only the third time all season that they've won a game by more than a 1-goal margin, and 2 of those wins have come in domestic cup competitions, which is quite telling. And looking at that first half performance, they created a host of chances. The game should have been put to bed by half time. And the 1 goal that did go in was not really a chance. It was a half chance. I remember thinking at the time when Dalot got the ball, Wigan need to close him down here because he's got a good strike on him. He did it at Sheffield United early in the season, took that goal very well. But they squandered some very, very presentable opportunities, and also quite telling those who are, I suppose, most guilty of that were McTominay and Rasmus Hojlund, and they're the joint top scorers. And it's another game last night where none of the front three have got on the score sheet. Hojlund's header, the one on the crossbar, was a really bad miss in particular.
If he heads that down, that goes in. Because it was from such point blank range, he almost did too much, I think, and it was really powerful.
Ian Wright, like my dad said, Ian Wright said something similar. Like he was talking about the technique he used in terms of heading it, and it's telling that when you look at the identity of the goal scorers in that game, it's another game where a defender has essentially scored the winning goal for United. I think that's happened 5 times this season. Dallow's got a couple, Maguire, Lindelof, Varane in the first game against Wolves, and the goal in the second half is a penalty. And there was a bit of a drop off in the second half, but United's advantage was never in jeopardy. You never ever got the sense that Wigan were going to force a replay. As I said, their one shot came at 0-0, and it was when there were probably not even 2 minutes on the clock.
Minus goal difference in the Premier League this season. They've won 10 games in the Premier League this year, and 9 of those have been by just a single goal, as you just said before. They failed to win by more than 3 goals throughout the entirety of Ten Hag's reign. So we'll look at last season. I mean, Rashford was scoring for fun, but even last season had this problem, and it's continued into this year, which hasn't been a surprise at all.
No, it isn't. And afterwards, when we were talking about it in the press room, and I think the statistics was I think is it in only 5 games out of all of their domestic games this season that one of the front three has got on the score sheet, something like that, which isn't a surprise. But you go back to the summer, if you're spending the £72 million on a potential goal scorer, and United knew it was potential they were buying, don't be surprised if you find goals hard to come by. Rashford has been an issue this season. It was interesting the relationship between the match goers and him again last night, which I'm sure we'll get on to. But they didn't have the plan in place, really. For it to have been a successful season, Hojlund had to really exceed expectations. I don't think he was ever going to do that just by virtue of his career before he got to United. And you go to United, you're playing for the most scrutinised football club in the world. The pressure is intense. The pressure's only going to get more intense as well in the run-in, where they're playing to win the FA Cup. That's the only trophy they can win, and of course they're going to have to strive to get into the top 4 as well. So it's going to become more intense, and the scrutiny is going to become more intense for him. And their wingers, Garnacho's having a pretty good season, I think, but he's still quite young. He doesn't turn 20 until July, I think it is, and he's already banked a hell of a lot of experience, but he is still developing. He's far from the finished article. So really the players that you're looking to as the go-to guys to be the reliable source of goals are Rashford, who's had a really poor season, and to a lesser extent Fernandes, who I suspect will break double figures for the season just by virtue that he's always involved. He'll one way or another.
And he's on penalties as well.
He's on penalties, of course, which can always bump up the numbers. But with the last penalty they had, I think would have been against Everton, when Fernandes took quite a risky decision to give the penalty to Rashford because he hadn't scored in nearly 3 months, and that's not opened the floodgates for him. The goal against Forest was his first goal from open play in nearly 4 months, I think it was. And yeah, last night, as I said, there's clearly a bit of friction there between Rashford and the match goers, who will become quite tetchy with him in the second half. He was playing right in front of them, and I think the sense they got was that he was overplaying it, or he wasn't showing enough alacrity on the ball. And I messaged a few friends that I had in the away end, because at first we thought, United 1-0 up here. They're okay. The game's not outside, but they are coasting. They're not going to throw this away, it feels like. I just said, why are some supporters getting on Rashford's back? And all of them were in unison in thinking that he deserved it. One said he didn't want to be there. One said he was, but they used a swear word to describe his performance, and somebody else said it's just half-hearted. So I think with match goers, they are, especially the away followers, that's the most reliable gauge of the fan sentiment, as Phil Lynch once infamously said a couple of seasons ago. And it's been an interesting dynamic between the supporters and Rashford this season, and the fact that there was some audible friction there last night in a game that United were winning and never in danger of losing or drawing, I think is quite telling. But it is frustrating. It's frustrating even for us to a lesser extent, that you watch United play, and they played well last night, but
you just want them to put a team to the sword.
Yeah, precisely.
Incapable of that.
And I think for them to be in a really, really bullish mood going into the Tottenham game on Sunday, they had to wipe the floor off Wigan last night. They had to win 4-0 or 5-0, and they've doled out a fair few 4-0 and 5-0 drubbings against Wigan yesteryear, and they really should have last night, but it was a pretty modest 2-0 win in the end.
We'll come on to Rashford a bit more in the second part. But I mean, the forwards have collectively disappointed. We were laughing on Boxing Day because I told you a few days before, you probably already knew to be fair, that the last forward to score Old Trafford was Jadon Sancho in May, of course, last season. But Garnacho, ironically, I tweeted that at half-time, and Garnacho came out and scored twice.
So they must have shown him with your tweet.
Garnacho was on his phone at the break and he went, yeah, I need to score now. Mainoo's performance and Samuel, Kobbie Mainoo, fantastic. He's been exceptional all season. We said, and some I always felt like he was going to be the player to break into the first team. He was exceptional on the pre-season tour and in the games before. He was excellent again last night. You messaged me towards the end of the game when he's been the best player. I went, yeah, probably agree. So composed, so cool on the ball. His pass is excellent. And we'll keep on saying it, but he looks like a player who's been at this level for ages, not just a few months now.
Yeah, I I love watching him play. I love watching him play in the handful of times I saw him in the Youth Cup games. And what was really impressive about him last night, just when you've got the privilege of being in the press box and you can observe certain things, was that in each half he had a conversation with Ten Hag, and you never got the sense that it was a manager just issuing instructions to a player and taking it on board. The conversation was two-way. It was a very engaging conversation, particularly in the second half. And 3 minutes after he had that conflab with Ten Hag, Mainoo advanced to the final third. He had a decent shot. Keeper made quite a good save. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he gets into that position a few minutes after speaking to his manager. And at a time where a lot of us are weighing up the pros and cons of Ten Hag, and he's been on he's not been the most stable of positions as United manager. What is very much in his favour is the development of Mainoo and also the development of Garnacho. And those two players, they looked like the two players who could get into the first team squad from when United won the Youth Cup a couple of years ago. And it's testament to the club's academy, which has been an absolute beacon in the past decade, where, okay, things have gone wrong quite often, but that's the beacon at United, and that remains the case. And of course, I know it was only a cameo really from Amari Forson, but that's the 249th academy graduate to debut for the first team. That's another positive. I think going back to Mainoo, I think, was it his loose pass that sparked that breakaway that's the thing Wigan had?
It was recently as well where he made a mistake
against West Ham when he could have scored.
But the thing is, he recovers from it usually, and the mental toughness and resilience at that age to have a setback, but to respond to it in such a positive manner is so impressive as well, and that's a huge strength.
Yeah, and what I'd say about that West Ham game was that although he did make the mistake that led to the contest-killing goal, if you like, is that I still think that performance will be more remembered for what he did in the 78 minutes before then, because he was United's best player that day. He was good on the ball. He was, when we watch him play well now, nobody's surprised, because he went into a very testing environment at Goodison Park for his full Premier League debut, and he was man of the match. He performed really well, again in a possibly more tested environment where United were expected to lose by quite a significant margin at Liverpool, and he helped United get a point in that one. He's contributed to a comeback from 2-0 down against Aston Villa. His importance can be gauged by when he's not on the pitch, like against Nottingham Forest. Everyone was in agreement that taking Mainoo off and putting McTominay on at half-time was just completely ill-advised, and it backfired. And it's still, it's a strange thing to say, I suppose, for someone who had maybe about 20-odd minutes experience of Premier League football before this season, but it's still a bit of a sliding doors moment, that injury he got in July, because he was clearly being ready to start the season for United. It wasn't just to go into the United squad, it was to go into the United team. And whenever Casemiro, Mount, Christian Eriksen, when they have all these midfielders back, the first one that goes into the team has to be Mainoo. I don't think anybody would dispute that. He's quality, and I think the next, I suppose the next objective for United is to get him on a longer contract, because the one he's on at the moment, I think he's probably he's worthy of a better salary the way it's going. And I think it's testament to how well he's done in quite a short space of time, that you look at him and the way he conducts himself. You look at that play and you think, that's a senior guy there. He may be 18 and he only turns 19 in April, I think it is. But everybody regards him as a senior player now, and he conducts himself like a senior player.
We play him how he is at 18 years old is remarkable. And my friend said to me last night, well, I just can't wait to see Mainoo in that midfield with Casemiro and Fernandes. I mean, Casemiro was very disappointed at the start of the season, but if he can get back to the form they showed last year, alongside Mainoo and Fernandes, that midfield has a lot of potential, I think.
Yeah, that could certainly see them through to have a successful run. And if Casemiro is able to rediscover the form of last season, and I think that's what will happen. He'll get paired with Mainoo, and if they can have a stable run in the team together, then it will be fascinating to see how they perform, because it was when Mainoo got that injury against Real Madrid in Houston, he was playing with Casemiro, and I think Fernandes was on the right and Mount was behind. Would it have been Rashford that night? Or I think it probably would have been, given given that they didn't really have a striker available at that time. So that was what, I mean, that team that was picked that night was as strong as it got from Ten Hag. And it was quite, I think he did have just about every start he would want available to put in that side. And like Kobbie, it's just a shame for Mainoo that he didn't get the chance to show what he could do against Jude Bellingham, Camavinga, Tchouaméni, this extremely talented Real Madrid side.
We don't get carried away in this podcast, but what we're saying is he's the best player in the world, not Kobbie.
Well, I think was it you said, or a coach you spoke to said he will play for England one day?
I was just struck by the confidence in that. And this guy knows his onions, he knows his young players. And he said to me, yeah, I'm so confident he'll play for England. And when someone says that, you do stand up and listen. And he's been proved right the last 18 months. And the Kobbie Mainoo that played for the academy is the Kobbie Mainoo who's playing now in the Premier League and the Champions League, which it takes a lot to go from the under-21s and making a difference in those leagues to actually senior football. Yeah. And he's the exact same player. His
development has been perfect, bar that injury in Houston. Like just in terms of after he won the Youth Cup, he bulked up in the summer, and I think Ten Hag coming into the club has obviously worked out really well for him. So, and everyone, I don't think anyone would doubt that Ten Hag was the right appointment that United made. And one of those reasons is because, and this is, as I said earlier, it's massively in his favour. It's his track record with young players. I mean, De Ligt, De Jong at Ajax, and now Mainoo and Garnacho at United.
Do you say the cliche? If you're good enough, you're old enough. And we'll leave it there for part one, Samuel. We'll be back over for part two.
We're launching a brand new bite-sized midweek audio-only podcast, bringing you the latest happenings from Old Trafford in a much more informal format, covering topical news, online gossip, transfers and personal tales as a roundup of everything you might have missed surrounding Manchester United. Join host Tyrone Marshall and myself, Rich Fay, as we go inside the club, separating the fact from the fiction and giving you an edge on your mates down the pub.
Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, we did promise to get into Rashford a bit more. I know you mentioned him in the first half. I feel like it was a bit of a mixed bag, Samuel, because he did come out with intent. He was creating chances, cutting inside, looking really positive. And I thought this is Rashford at his best. We've saw glimmers of it in the last few weeks because he's been playing on the left. But as you said, as the game went on, he regressed and he kind of slumped in confidence. I thought maybe that's got a lot to do with the relationship with fans at the moment, and he can kind of feel the patience running out with supporters, and that's understandable, to be fair. But I think that the confidence has always been an issue. We say he's the ultimate confidence player, and I think when he's searching for that goal and it doesn't happen, he starts to just dip off a bit, and you can see that his shoulders kind of shrink a bit, don't they?
Well, that relatively early shot that he had where Tickle did very well, not just to keep it out, given how close Rashford was when he hit it, but to get out for a corner. That was almost Rashford at his best. If it went in, it was Rashford at his best because he got the ball, he moved it quickly, shifted it quickly, he engineered the opening, he struck the ball very, very cleanly as well. And if that goes in, it's probably a different night for him. And I thought in the first half he was creative. There was nothing wrong with the way he conducted himself, but as I said, I think what we found jarring was, in terms of the tetchiness of the supporters with Rashford in the second half, was just that United were winning and they were never going to throw that game away. But you can understand, especially where Rashford was playing in front of them as well in that second half, that there are different demands imposed on him to other players. I mean, the first half, Wan-Bissaka played in front of them. They're not going to get on Wan-Bissaka's back because he's not crossing the ball, because he's always turning around and shifting the ball, because they know that's what Wan-Bissaka does. He's a right back who they signed from Crystal Palace. With Rashford, there are different demands because he was born in Wythenshawe. He came through the academy. He is the poster boy. But more relevantly, he was brilliant last season. He was in career best form last season. Then he got a new contract and his form has dropped off the edge of a cliff. And fans are not stupid. One of the reasons why he got such a steep salary rise was because his brother went to meet intermediaries who were acting on behalf of Paris Saint-Germain in Paris. And supporters don't forget those things. So when the player is not performing, there's a problem. And the relationship between Rashford and matchgoers this season, it goes back as far as September. I remember during that Brighton defeat.
His body language has been a concern, and you think, right, come on, Marcus, kind of sort this out a bit. And the months have progressed and it's continued, which I think is why supporters are starting to really get frustrated with him.
Yeah, and it was definitely an issue, not even just against Brighton in September. It was an issue a couple of seasons ago under Ralf Rangnick. I
remember the Chelsea game was in the April that year, when Garnacho made his debut. That, for me, that game stands out in my memory. Rashford was terrible. His lack of running, his work rate was disgraceful, to be fair. He honestly, he just didn't run at all. And I remember writing a piece the next day and having a bit of a pop with him, because you've got to run for the shirt. It's the bare minimum, especially when you're on such a high wage. You're an academy graduate. You're supposed to know what the club means and you really care and give your all. And he didn't that day.
I think it was, coincidentally, it would have been 2 years ago in the third round against Villa, which was televised on the BBC, and Rashford was particularly appalling that night. And the supporters were getting on his back that night. And I think his team at the time, the handling of Rashford has changed since, but there were some very sympathetic briefings that were issued, and a lot of colleagues, did these briefings, or sorry, not did these briefings. They wrote up pieces that were informed by that. I think others. I mean, I at the time I've been very critical of him already in the season. It would have looked a bit jarring had I all of a sudden,
avoided that.
Extremely sympathetic towards him. I maintain it was being objective, because I was just judging him on how he's performing. He was chronically underperforming, and now here we are 2 years later after an FA Cup third round game, and there was palpable discord from the supporters. And as I said, the Brighton game in September, there was certainly groans of discontent with how Rashford was conducting himself. Of course, was it against City? There were cheers, sarcastic cheers when he was substituted. Hours later, he has that ill-advised birthday party, which Ten Hag said was unacceptable. So I think that would have contributed to how supporters are reacting to his performances at the moment. Newcastle was then in dear this season. He was so bad that Jamie Carragher said the worst thing I can say about him is that he reminds me of Marshall. I can probably top that in a way. Watching Rashford this season, he actually reminds me of Theo Walcott. Because Theo Walcott, the only time he had a good spell of form for Arsenal was when he was playing for a contract. He got that contract and then he became a complete irrelevant.
Do you think it's as simple as that then? Because he seems to have a fantastic season and drop off and then kind of come back and have a burst. Surely it'd be too simplistic, but okay, he's only actually performing when he's got a bit of jeopardy, he's playing for a deal. Is he just not... Because I always felt he's one step away from being world class. And to be world class, you need to produce consistent performances. And that's his problem. He doesn't produce consistency. And is that not why he's just not at that level? Although he is a brilliant player, he's not quite at the upper echelons of the game.
I think he has to... From what I've been told about Rashford, and I've said this before, he's another footballer, and I'm sure there are plenty of them, thousands of them, who does not take criticism well. And Ten Hag is going to be critical of players. He's not been that critical of them publicly this season. He's definitely softened that, because it did go down badly with the players. I'd always be of the opinion that, look, if you're Man United playing, you're telling me not to be critical when the best you can do is a League Cup and third place last season. You can...
If you don't like it, love it.
Exactly. And that gives you an idea as to how Rashford operates. I think he has to be told how brilliant he is and that he's the main man. He's always in that position. You look at how it's gone for him this season. He started the season playing up front. That's not his optimum position. Then Garnacho Garnacho started some like 13 or 14 games on the spin, I think. And the majority of them have been on the left. He's playing on the right now to accommodate Rashford. But that doesn't reflect well on Rashford either, because Garnacho is playing on the right. He's playing on the right was against Villa. He played there, and last night he's played well. And who'd have thought it? A right footer can actually play well on the right wing. There's been this misconception in recent years that if you're a right footer, you have to play on the left wing.
I've said for a while it was worth putting Garnacho on that side because if you're still so young, right footed, put balls in the box and play Rashford on the left.
But at Newcastle, it was Rashford on the right and Garnacho on the left.
He sold, didn't he? That's what he did. He sold.
Yeah, and Rashford, his stock has not improved much since, but his stock was so low going into that Newcastle game that the consensus pre-match was that Anthony should start ahead of him. That's how bad he was at that time, and he's not improved a great deal since. And since then, there were definitely a minority who booed him when he came on against Chelsea. He got a deserved standing ovation when he came off against Villa because he was electric at times in that comeback. And then you've got last night where it was just frivolous far too often in the second half. And there was one time where he got into the area, he held onto the ball for an inexplicable amount of time. He was doing this, doing that, and he takes it over the goal line. It's a goal kick. And immediately you think of Hojlund's disallowed goal against Brighton on his first Premier League start, where Rashford needlessly took the ball out. And if he didn't, and he gets the ball in and Hojlund scores, it's a legitimate goal. Hojlund, one, has got a goal on his full Premier League debut, and also United have made it 1-1 against Brighton. That's a big sliding doors moment if Rashford's not overindulging. Looking ahead to, obviously we'll talk more about Spurs on Friday, but I still suspect Rashford will start that game against Tottenham, just by virtue that Anthony is Anthony. Who else are you going to play, really? I mean, Facundo Pellistri is not going to start. Ahmad is not going to start. So he's not actually got that much competition at the moment, whereas 2 years ago, there was Sancho, who Ralph Rangnick quite liked. There was Anthony Elanga, who was essentially Ralph Rangnick's academy legacy. So there were a couple of players ahead of him at that time, and he was dreadful that season. But it's a worry that, as I said, 2 years ago, FA Cup third round, the supporters are getting on his back, and Rashford has got 3 goals at the time. Here we are. Supporters are getting on his back, and Rashford has got 3 goals this season.
And yeah, I've still saw a lot of supporters saying, right, come on, let's just get behind him. Academy graduate, as you said, poster boy. He really needs our support right now. He is dividing opinion. There's a lot of people that are getting sick of him, and I understand that as well. Long term, is there an argument to say, should he be sold? Should he be moved on? Because there is that kind of conversation growing now, and we should probably address it. Because although he has been fantastic, and he is, as we see, the poster boy, I'm just looking at almost 400 senior appearances, 384, 126 goals and 74 assists, and that's still an excellent record. Yeah. But it is so frustrating how he has these in and out seasons. Is there a case maybe down the line to sell him? Because I couldn't see it this summer.
This summer coming up,
it would be an incredibly bold, this big statement as well.
But I think sometimes one of the best seasons during Ferguson's time was when Mark Hughes, Paul Ince and Andrei Kanchelskis were sold in one summer, and United didn't sign anyone. I mean, if that had happened in this day,
could you imagine the meltdown? We'd be sitting on the podcast.
I think the internet would probably have collapsed that day. But sometimes you've got to make decisions like that, and I do think there is a case for it, and I think there would be quite a fair bit of support for it among the match goers. I maintain, like when we heard the groans or the I don't know how you describe it. It was almost like they're saying, "Come on, what are you doing with the ball?" That was what the sense we were getting. It did feel jarring at the time, just because United 1-0 up. They'd absolutely dominated Wigan in the first half, and although it was only 1-0, they were coasting.
Because it's Wigan and it's Marcus Rashford. You want him to score a few against Wigan, don't you?
And I completely agree with the supporters' outlook on that. I think that there's, I see the point from both sides. But really, I think Rashford's, I just think that with a lot of the match goers, his card is marked just because they will look at the way he went about his work last season, the contract he got, the way he's gone about his work this season. And I hadn't thought until we were discussing it, but the regression from, he's in the same position he is in literally the same position he was in 2 years ago, in that he's got 3 goals this season as he did that season. And he's just had an FA Cup third round performance where the supporters are getting on his back. So
next season he'll score 30 goals and it'll all be happy as Larry.
That would be ideal, yeah. If United can win a trophy next season with him getting 30 goals, I think everyone will be pleased there.
was going to ask you about Hojlund's bad finishing. He missed a few chances. We talked about the header in the first part. I guess we've already said it all, have we not, this season?
I think we have.
So we don't really need to get into Hojlund. As you say, we said it's chapter and verse.
I think the only thing I'd say to add on him is that I always thought it was a bit of a myth that he doesn't get service. And I could probably count close to a dozen opportunities he's had this season where you look at that and you think he should score that, or the striker should be disappointed not to score that. You think of, I think there were maybe 2 against Palace, 3 against Sheffield United, the 1-on-1 against City, a couple against Luton, Liverpool.
Luton was the moment for me that I thought, right, you've got to do better. Because up until then, I thought, yeah, he had service in the Champions League, but I think the chances has been scarce in the Premier League. But that game, he needed to do better. And from there, it has been quite poor. And you can only defend the player so much. He is still young, and we're not criticising him heavily for that reason, because we know exactly what we're getting with Hojlund, don't we?
Yeah, and none of us are surprised by it. And United weren't. It's not like they thought they were buying someone who was going to be prolific. He was described as a rough diamond by someone quite senior at the club, and they were talking about, like, again, I've said this before, I'm sure, but they were talking about he might not play some games and Marcus Rashford will start up front. So they weren't even mentioning Anthony Marshall because he was that much of an afterthought, but they were mentioning Rashford as if he was a reliable centre forward. So again, the planning with the whole striker situation was poor. They needed someone proven, they didn't get someone proven, and the chances are it will cost them in terms of Champions League qualification for next season.
But if we had a time machine, we could fast forward 3 years and Hojlund could be the top goal scorer in the Premier League. So have you got one of those?
Well, he could be, but unfortunately, you are judged on what you're on what you're doing.
Gino De Campo once said, "If my grandma had wheels, she'd be a bicycle." Very good quote. I've always liked that one. Onana, Samuel, I thought it was worth mentioning him, because how bad must Altay be if he's not getting a game in that match? Obviously, the club and Onana, to be fair, it has been mutual. He's deferred his kind of call up to the African Cup of Nations with Cameroon. But he made an excellent first save in the first few minutes. We've said that. But apart from that, he had nothing to do. I'm not convinced that being there couldn't have filled in that game. And obviously, Tottenham's coming up. They're in talks still, Ten Hag said. To have Onana for that match, that's a more important game.
Which is 24 hours before Cameroon's first AFCON game.
But it's been a bit of a bizarre... For me, it's a bit bizarre, because what message does that send to the backup goalkeeper and the rest of the squad?
It's bizarre in the sense that it's not like Onana's been really good this season, or they should be moving heaven and earth to keep him. You look at Liverpool 2 years ago, Sadio Mane and Mohamed Salah both went off to AFCON, and I don't think Liverpool were moving heaven and earth to try and keep them. They just, accepted that it's AFCON. They're going to go off, and it's really important for their countries. And I think it was an Egypt-Sevilla final as well that year. So they both played as many games as possible, which was even more damaging for Liverpool. But that was a season where Liverpool, going into May, a quadruple was still on, because Liverpool can cope with those squad issues. But with Onana, he cost United more than any other player in the Champions League. Okay, I suppose in the Premier League he's not made as many mistakes, but all I can think of in terms of United's discussions with with Cameroon in terms of keeping him is that it was the Tottenham game they wanted to keep him for, and of course Wigan is coming before that. You can imagine the commotion that would go on if Cameroon had agreed for Onana to stay for that Tottenham game, and then he doesn't play in a game in the FA Cup when he could be training with Cameroon in preparation for their first AFCON game next week. So I suspect if the fixtures were switched around, they'd say, look, can we play him? Can we have him for the Tottenham game? Yeah, no problem. And then he goes off straight away. Whereas, because the fixtures are the way they are, they can't not play him against Wigan. But I'd have just been of the opinion that, his last game's Forest, off you go, and we've got to put Bayinda in against Wigan, see how he is.
Is it 4.5 million they signed him for?
Yeah, I think so, something like that.
I mean, squad management, keeping players right, motivating them. What message is that sending to him? And surely, I know he is. He signed to be a backup goalkeeper, and he understands that. But is his head not thinking, right, I want out now? Because I'm not even getting a chance in the cup competitions. If you're pushing so hard to keep an eye, I just don't think that's a very good look.
No, I don't think it reflects well on United's decision to sign Bayindir and Bayindir himself. None of us know
You just have
if he's any
if that was your plan. If you were just going to continue, I know for injuries and stuff, you do need a backup goalkeeper, but it's frustrating, I think, for the backup goalkeeper.
Yeah, well, you go back to the League Cup game against Crystal Palace, and I think there was an element of surprise that Bayindir wasn't starting in that game. And I think Ten Hag suggested afterwards that because Onana had made his mistake against Bayern the previous week, it was a case of keeping him in the team, giving him that regular matches so that his confidence wasn't hit, even though all you had to do was say, look, it's League Cup, I'm rotating a bit, backup goalkeeper's going in, you're getting the night off, you're back in goal on Saturday against Palace in the league game. I don't think that would have been complicated, but I think the way Ten Hag has presided over the goalkeeping situation, at times it has been complicated. Last season, I remember when Jack Butland came in and there was some confusion as to who was the number two. And Ten Hag said, I don't have a number two, it's just two backup keepers. And then you had Jack Butland on the bench for the FA Cup final. And I just thought that was because he'd been on the bench for a number of games in succession. I thought, where's the methodology there? Because the chances are Tom Heaton's got a better penalty record. And if it had got to a shootout, you'd have to have considered bringing Heaton on if at all possible, because David De Gea was the goalkeeper and has not got the best record in shootouts, and he conceded that Brighton shootout. It was only settled because Solly March put one over the crossbar. So as I said, I think United have made a mountain out of a molehill with Onana. They should have just allowed him to go. And look, okay, they're going to come up against some very good forwards in Tottenham on Sunday, but it was an opportunity to give Bayindir a run out against Wigan, assess how he got on. If he looked like a bag of nerves, then put Tom Heaton in, who, okay, he's 30, what is he, 38, I think, or something, 37, 38. But he's got experience, and he'll have played against Tottenham countless times, and he'll have played against those players, the majority of those players in the Tottenham team as well. So, as I said, I think they just made a mountain out of a molehill, but Onana did make a good and important save last night, the one time he was called upon.
I mean, even Martin Dubravka got played, was it twice in the early rounds of the Carabao Cup? Yeah. United obviously crashed out in the first game against Newcastle, but Onana started that match. I guess because it was against a better Premier League side, maybe. I don't know what.
Yeah, but then again, as you said, in the League Cup last season, the first game United played was against Aston Villa, and he took De Gea out of the team and he put Dubravka in, and Dubravka started against Burnley in the next round, and I think they were his two appearances for United, and he looked extremely unconvincing, and that was the last we saw of him.
But he got a cup winners.
He kept very quiet about that. He left a good period of time while
it only came out recently.
Yes, yeah. His stock has gone up a little bit for Newcastle fans, so he clearly thought that was a good time to come out with it.
There's a few absentees, obviously, last night. I mean, Ahmad and Eriksen out with illness. To be fair, there has been a lot of that this season, but when I listened to Ten Hag, you might have picked up on it as well after the game. I thought Ten Hag sounded loaded with a cold. So maybe, look, it is normal. It happens around the workplace.
Well, he did have, just before his press conference started, he did have quite a long swig of water, which I don't think he normally does.
Don't call that for a piece, that, Samuel.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think people are probably...
Can they win the FA Cup this season then, just to end this part? As Samuel takes his sip of water, ironically.
Yeah, that's not me dwelling on the question. Yeah, they can, because look, I think they've got they've got anything close, as close to a bye as possible with the draw for the next round. Eastleigh or Newport, that's a non-league side or a League Two side. City are away at Tottenham, as that means another one of the big hitters.
Chelsea going to be eliminated. Well, am I right in saying that?
I don't know. The Wi-Fi was so bad last night. I'm not sure. I think
there was some favourable draws anyway.
Liverpool at home to Norwich or Bristol Rovers, is it? I think Richard Jolly was saying.
Yeah, Chelsea got away last, so that's two big guns got each other again.
You've got Chelsea paired with Villa and Tottenham paired with City, so that's at least two relative big hitters. I hesitate to call Chelsea a big hitter given the way they've gone about.
But it's cup football, isn't it?
Yeah,
but anything can happen in cup
yeah, and of course Chelsea are in the not wishing to give you a painful reminder, but Chelsea are in the semi-finals of the League Cup. So it's it's all on the cups for them this season. That's the deliverance on offer for Mauricio Pochettino. But United are all but certain to be in the last 16, and I don't see any reason why not. And where the calendar's not going to be as crammed for them, more players are going to come back. They'll have more strength in depth. I think if I'm looking at the Newport Eastleigh score at the weekend. I think Eastleigh were down to 10 men, but they scored an 82nd minute penalty. And what a huge moment that could be for them if they end up hosting.
I think they're 11th from the conference. That's the National League now it's called, but that's incredible. If they can beat Newport, what a draw that is for Eastleigh to have United down.
It's going to be one of the most. It's going to be one of the most competitive replays in recent years. I think just because
they'll be resting players up to the lead up to
and also I think what those two clubs should have worked out by now is that the team that United play in the fourth round is going to be a pretty strong one because they won't have played for a long time, and they're going to want a decent match with them going into the Wolves game, which will be 4 or 5 days later, going off educated guesswork because obviously nobody knows the dates of the fourth round yet. So yeah, it's not like United are going to be pulling into town with Joe Hugel, Dan Gore, Amari Forson, Reece Bennett and Shola Shaw's era in the starting 11. It will be probably a similar team to the one that started at Wigan.
Forgive me geography, but I had to search where Eastleigh was. I knew it was down south.
See, I did know where
I didn't realise it was that far down. It's basically in France. So for as far as United fans are concerned,
it's Simon Peach's manor. Yeah, I think when the draw was made, I wasn't best pleased when I was told that it was Newport or Eastleigh away, just for the sheer mileage that's going to be clocked up. Although fortunately it's not going to be my turn to drive on that one, but I think we could have a fun bus scheduled for that trip, given that I think a few of us are going to be told to go down there. But Simon Peach is
his neck of the woods.
Yes, exactly. He grew up not far from there.
We'll leave it there for part 2. We'll be back in for part 3.
No one covers Manchester United quite like the Manchester Evening News, and through our MUFC Pro app, you can support our journalism and become part of our United community, getting the best experience ad-free, pop-up-free and distraction-free as well, giving you the best news and interviews, great features and much more. Now is the perfect time to subscribe, as we've just launched a special New Year offer which includes MEN Premium for just £12 for 12 months. Download the app and get started today.
Welcome back to part 3 of the Manchester is Red podcast. I'm Samuel. We'll have a bit of transfer chat briefly and look ahead to Tottenham. But as you say, we'll be back later in the week, so we'll save the majority of the chat for that. Ten Hag said they would look in the market for a loan striker, or he would be open to it anyways, I think was the quote. That's not surprising, as you said, was it on the other day in the podcast that signed a lot of loan players with Ten Hag in charge. But who could they sign? That's the thing. You look at the market, you look at the strikers available, there seems to be a real dearth of forwards that are actually around.
He said...
we can't have Wild White Boys come back, can we?
No, we cannot.
No.
He said we consider everything, which is obviously a very expansive answer. And the way United are talking about it, they still say that it's unlikely that there'll be an incoming. But then again, as I've stressed before, they said that incomings were unlikely going into the final week of the summer transfer window, and they ended up signing 4 players on deadline day. I still think that there would have to be, a few more flies would have to drop for United to say, right, we need to dip into the loan market here. It was a very callow bench last night, but Ten Hag did say that there could be a few returns for the game on Sunday. He said that Luke Shaw was a potential return. Christian Eriksen, Harry Maguire, he said was a maybe. But look, where this month, I mean, they've only got 2 more games this month, which will be Spurs on Sunday and then Eastleigh or Newport County in the final weekend of January. So as far as this month goes, there's not a great deal of pressure on them to get players in for immediate use, and then the way they're talking about it with some of the injured players coming back. And I know he said on Thursday that Casemiro and Miss Martinez were still weeks away. Going off that, the date that United have got circling the calendar for them to come back, to make their playing comeback, is Eastleigh or Newport, which would be pretty much 3 weeks.
I mean, I was even thinking February the 1st, to be honest, when I was looking at it. It seems to take them a while once they're actually on grass and doing light training to actually being in contention to start.
Yeah, and I think everybody...
I'm was on grass for around 8 weeks, 9 weeks, I think, before.
Yes, he was, yeah. And it's been the case, I think it was Kobbie Mainoo who's the one who, obviously they were very, very careful and fastidious with his comeback, because he was, as you said, he was on the grass in probably late September or early October, but he didn't play for the first team until late November, it would have been, against Everton. And okay, this Eastleigh Newport game that's coming up, I suspect some long-term absentees will be back in the squad for that game, and that eases things. February is a hugely important month because they've got 5 Premier League fixtures, and 2 of them against teams that are currently above them in the table at the moment. So they've got to be, the squad state going into February has got to be a hell of a lot better than it is at the moment. The only area where they would have to, I still think that they should be getting a player in for that position, but that's my opinion, and I'm sure it's the opinion of others, is obviously up front, because they need a different...
Hojlund needs help, doesn't he?
Yeah, they need a different source of goals, but they are, they're impeded, frankly, by Anthony Marshall at the moment. He's been unwell for 4 weeks. In the summer, he was injured for almost the entirety of it, so they couldn't sell him. In the winter transfer window, he's been unwell for all of it so far, so they can't sell it.
Do you know, I think it's typical that for the first time in living memory, Marshall hasn't had any fitness problems all season. He's actually been available quite a bit, to be fair to him. And it comes around to the January transfer window, and he's... I
know, and maybe there'll be some context that's provided.
Nothing's been provided through this illness. It could be something a bit more serious.
Exactly, and sometimes one is hesitant to be too harsh, but it's still... Speaking at the moment, it's still not a good look, but whether any context is provided on that remains to be seen. I think things would have to still change a fair bit for United to have a compelling case where they think, okay, we need to make a loan sign. I mean, you look at the players who came in last January on loan, all 3 were enforced. Dubravka was recalled, and very quickly they got Butland in. Eriksson was injured by Andy Carroll in the FA Cup game against Reading, and they only had 2 or 3 days to get to be fair in. And in fairness, I think
they did really well to get Sabitzer in so quickly.
They did, and they didn't have that much time as well, even because they had to have the scan on Eriksson and await the results for that, and then go into the loan market. And Sabitzer was a decent signing. He did a decent job for United, and. I remember when I was told at the time that they were in for him, I thought, that's actually, having watched him for Leipzig, and look, if Bayern Munich sign a player, they don't tend to sign many duffers. I think that United did well with that one. And of course, Weghorst came in because Ronaldo had gone. They got that wrong.
What a statement that is.
Yes, they got that wrong. They got that very wrong. And in fairness to Weghorst, he was overexposed just through Marshall's brittleness. Like Weghorst started so many games on the spin when he first went in.
Honestly, I forgot how many games he actually started. Yeah. So recently, I was like, bloody hell.
I know. It was, I think, again
PTSD from that time watching Weghorst.
Like Rashford earlier in the season, and how it's been his seasonal nadir at Newcastle. I think Newcastle was the nadir for Weghorst as well. He might have only started 1 game after that at West Ham. His card was well and truly marked after that day, because he wasn't good enough. As I've said before, his commitment wasn't in question. He tried, but when it comes to actually scoring goals, he has not been good at it.
So you a 5-a-side, isn't he?
Pardon?
Is that you a 5-a-side when it comes to scoring goals?
Or you that time? I think that you had that miss one time, and I actually just burst out laughing because you'd been so profligate that evening. But
high XG though.
My finishing is definitely worse, undoubtedly.
Top four hopes then. I mean, the game against Tottenham already seems quite important for that. I know it's only January, but Tottenham are 5th in the table, 8 points ahead of United. Obviously, Aston Villa are flying in second as well. City and Arsenal fill in the remaining positions of Liverpool. I mean, to get to the FA Cup final now and to get top four from the first 6 months of the season, the first half of the season, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, it would be quite the turnaround, escape act, rescue act, whatever you want to call it. Their month is going to be defined by this Tottenham game. It's not going to be defined by Wigan away or Newport or Eastleigh away. It all hinges on the Spurs game, and that is, I'd say every game's a must-win game for United, but that is of particular consequence. I mean, Tottenham are 7 points clear of United in the table. The thought of Tottenham stretching that advantage to 10 points ahead of United, and then United don't have a Premier League game again until February the 1st, I think it is, against Wolves. That would be a really significant blow if they were to not win that game at the weekend. I really think that they have to win it. They have to have a real fillip going into those February fixtures where, I think, is it West Ham at home, Villa away, Luton away. I think they end the month with at home against Fulham. There might be an FA Cup game in there now instead of...
You've done very well there. I didn't give you much help because I was trying to get it up. Wolves away, West Ham at home, Aston Villa away, Luton away, and end the month with Fulham at home.
Yeah.
So and then it's City after that. It's City at the start of March, so it's a key run of fixtures. So.
Exactly. So just look at those February fixtures, and I'll go back to last season, that they had 8 games in 26 days in February, and they did phenomenally well to win 6, draw 2, end the month still in the top 4 and quite a way ahead in third place. In fact, they knocked Barcelona out in the Europa League playoff. They won their cup final against Newcastle. It was a near perfect month, but it was a month. In retrospect, it's like an international team gearing up for a tournament and just being so switched on, so focused, so bullish, so professional in the way they went about their job and getting the job done and doing what was needed. And it's probably not a surprise. There was a gradual decline last season after that peak of winning the League Cup in late February, and United grit prevailed over goal, I'd say, in the final months of that season. But it was still undeniably a successful season. But they need a similar mentality going into next February as well. This February coming up, I should say.
We'll leave it there then for today's podcast. Samuel, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Stephen, as always.
And thanks to listeners as usual. Just a quick note that Tyrone Marshall and Rich Fay will return for a new edition of the Manchester's Red podcast. They'll be getting into transfers, gossip, news, etc. and everything in between. And me and Samuel will be back on Friday in our usual slot. So now it's said, have a great week and we'll see you there.